Alright, hey guys, what's up? So I'm going to talk about the Raven and go over some important rhyme schemes and rhythm and structure so that you guys can analyze it, and this will be very important for your understanding of poetry in general. So let's look at the first stanza and see how Poe creates his style for his poem, The Raven. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, "tapping at my chamber door. Only this, and nothing more." I'll read the second stanza too, because I think it'll help you see how he continues to develop his structure. Distinctly I remember, it was in that bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I sought to borrow from my book surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. So as you continue reading the poem, you'll see that the narrator, he's in this kind of dark place. It seems like he lost his lover, Lenore, and he hears someone tapping at his door, and what he ends up finding is a raven comes in, and a raven, the only thing that the raven says is nevermore. And the narrator asks a series of questions to the raven, asking, hey, will I remember my Lenore? Will I ever see her again? And as he asks all these questions, the raven continues to say nevermore, and that drives the narrator insane, and just down this dark rabbit hole tunnel. And very interesting stuff. And I love this poem, and it's what made Edgar Allan Poe famous as well, his most famous work to this day. And I want to go over the rhyme scheme first. What happens is, in each stanza, he has a rhyme scheme where he starts with two words that rhyme in the first line. Whew. And so you'll see in the first stanza, he says dreary and weary. And then in the second line, he starts a new rhyme scheme, lore. And this continues in the fourth line, door, the fifth line, and the sixth line, more. We'll call that B. And so he has the first line, the rhyme scheme A, and the second line goes B, and that correlates to line 4, 5, and 6. And then we have a new rhyme scheme that develops in line 3, which we'll call C, which is napping, tapping, and rapping. And so we have what's called a midway rhyme, where he has these rhymes in the middle of the lines that correlate to the end of the line. And he continues it again in stanza 2. We'll call this D, remember. And it correlates to the end of the same line, December. And he does a midway rhyme here again with ember, but he doesn't do that for all the stanzas, so we're not going to annotate it yet. And then he uses floor, which is the same rhyme scheme as stanza 1, line 2, lore. And he continues that in line 4, and is consistent again in line 5 and line 6. And so this little half line at the end of each stanza, and it continues on throughout the entire poem, the B's never change. The B's are always in the third or second, fourth, fifth, and sixth line, and this little half stanza is always rhyme scheme B. And then we have morrow in line 3, which correlates to borrow, and sorrow, which is another midway rhyme. And so you can see how he creates this rhyme scheme that continues, and the genius of this is that it just continues going throughout the entire poem, and you'll see it as you continue reading yourself. And so pay attention to that rhyme scheme and also the structure, which I'll talk about. So if you need to pause this video and look at the rhyme scheme, then go ahead and do so. I'll wait a couple seconds. All right. And look at the structure. He uses what's called iambic octameter. I'm sorry. So the way he separates each line with an unstressed once upon a midnight dreary. And so we'll break it up right there in that first little measure here. And in poetry, when you break up one set of two syllables like this, once that's called a meter. A meter. And so you can see that it's broken up into 4 meters right here. Once upon a midnight dreary. It continues here. While I pondered, weak and weary. Basically what I'm doing is for each little U that you see here is what we call an unstressed syllable, and the little accent is a stressed syllable. And so every time that you hear that, that's called an iamb. An iamb is a meter where there's an unstressed and stressed syllable. So once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary. You can see how he creates a certain structure and flow and rhythm to his poem. And that's the other thing about the mastery of Edgar Allan Poe, which, as I mentioned before multiple times, he was strongly influenced by Shakespeare. And Shakespeare loved to write English sonnets, and English sonnets use iambic pentameter all the time, which means that there are 5 iambs per line. Here you can see an iambic octameter because you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, excuse my writing, sorry, 7, 8. So 8 meters of iambic octameter is what it's called. And the only time it varies is in this little mini line. And let's see what this only this and nothing more. So it's not really iambic in that it's kind of breaks the structure. But you can kind of see, and he does this pretty consistently throughout the poem. But you don't really need to focus too much on that. You just need to make sure that you remember kind of the way that he breaks up each stanza is in the rhyme schemes. There's a midway rhyme in lines 1 and 2, or 1, 3, and 4, and the A A B C C C B B B rhyme scheme. And so there's always 6 lines per stanza. 5 are the normal iambic octameter, and the 6th is always kind of almost a half of the entire thing. So keep that in mind as you start thinking about your own poems. And finish reading the poem. It's so phenomenal. I love it, and I hope you guys enjoy it as well.